So, thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. And right now we're going to go into not urban public transport, usually the prototype of people when they talk about public transit or public transportation or public transport, but the intercity equivalent, by which I mostly mean high speed rail. Um, I mean intercity rail in general, but I mostly mean things are very modernized to the point that they either are high speed rail or almost high speed rail. Like we're talking things like the German network, the Swiss network, things like that. And specifically these, so these lead to a lot of business analysis, which is somewhat different from that of normal urban transit. And this is for a bunch of reasons. The first is that it is typically profitable. In Europe, the norm is that intercity trains are not subsidized. Subsidies go to regional trains. Subsidies go to local urban and suburban transit. But intercity trains are expected to be profitable, even when, as in almost all cases, they are run by state railways. And essentially, this is because they can be. Now, I will point out that in big cities, it's also possible for urban transit to be profitable. The Berlin U-Bahn, I believe, was breaking even before Corona. I think so was the London Underground. But usually in these cases, they will be very tightly bundled with unprofitable things like buses or like suburban lines. I'm almost certain, by the way, that the Paris Metro is profitable if you ignore all of the connections and if you ignore the suburban era. It's not transparent, but judging by traffic densities, judging by operating costs, I'm almost certain that this is correct. Whereas with intercity trains, I'm guessing it's a different history of the business analysis, so they're not opaquely bundled with unprofitable regional lines, but rather try to be separated out. The other thing is that the notion of transit-oriented development doesn't really work that way. Now, obviously, you could do transit-oriented development on top of high-speed rail, and I'm actually, and because I forgot to open Cool Earth before I started recording, I'm going to do so right now, and show you guys what is, in Europe, the most successful high-speed rail-oriented, transit-oriented development that I'm aware of, which is Pardieu. Now, I talk about Europe, but we're also going to talk about Japan, and in Japan that it also exists. In fact, Pardieu is in many ways similar to the Osaka equivalent of Shin Osaka. So, for people who don't know, the historic city of Lyon ended at the river. So, not only that, but the river was the border between provinces. So, west of the river, it's Lyonnais. And then east of the river, it's already a completely separate province called Dauphiné, whose historic center was Vienne. So, the department, so the Rhône department was constantly moved to the east. They constantly annexed parts of the east because the city of Lyon grew into the historic province of Dauphiné. So the historic center is around here. So, and this is where Perrache is. But when they built the TGV, I believe it was just considered too difficult to serve, to easily serve Perrache. So instead, they built a new station. Now, the TGV is full of these stations that are peripheral. Even Lyon has one at the airport for through trains to points from Paris to Point South. It's Saint-Exupéry. It's here, I guess. Yeah, here. You can kind of see the broad curves of the line right here. And but even for trains into Lyon city center, they did not, or almost never did, go to Perrache. The norm is for them to go to a new station that was just easier to get to from where they were building the line. Now, this was built here, so in an area that, to be very clear, was not part of the city until I think after the revolution. And the and they built three things at once: the Lyon Metro, the LGV Sud-Est, and the city and this high-rise office district, which is the second largest in France, the largest being, of course, La Défense. But La Défense was never really destined to be the Paris central business. It is at a very small scale, let's say 1 square kilometer. It does have Paris's highest job density just because of the high rises. But at any larger scale, the top job density in Paris remains in the traditional city center, around the opera, around Saint-Lazare. Whereas, as I understand it, in Lyon, this is city center nowadays. However, the TOD is local in nature. So the presence of this TOD meant that Lyon could be further grown around the TGV station. However, this didn't make Lyon into a large city by itself. It was already France's second city. And this is different from the situation with urban transit, where you can just make a growth plan and turn places that weren't really important before into thriving residential neighborhoods. And usually my European to-go example of this is Stockholm. Partly it's because for the Transit Coast project, I spent quite a lot of my time studying the history of the T-Bana. And of course, this includes not just the construction costs of the original system, which, just as a reminder, were ungodly low. The about 100 kilometer system, a little more than 50% underground, was built between the 40s and 70s for, in today's money, $3.6 billion. And moreover, they had very good transit-oriented development in the sense that they took places that didn't really exist as urbanized places before. The best example is Vellingbue. And they turned them into big places, oriented. So the issue is, it's not like So the difference is that a place like Vellingbue, it's not like Vellingbue was already a large independent town, and the presence of the T-Bana just meant that its city center became the train station. No, this would not have been much of a place. I mean, people might still have lived there, but not nearly so many, if it hadn't been for the construction of this line in the station and the public housing. It's not a Million program. This is actually before the Million program. That was built on top of it, and so the role for state-led development with high-speed rail is there, but it's much lessened, and this leads to a lot of business analysis. High-speed rail is also flashy. In the UK, yes, TfL. Okay, so in the UK, yes, the London Underground is profitable, but also but as I understand it, the the privatized intercity lines are, as I understand it, profitable as well. And so, the issue with TfL is just weird. For example, there's no bus rail fare integration, which is atypical for Europe. More common in East Asia, but I think even in East Asia, the bus rail fare differences, they exist, but they're smaller than in London. But anyway, the point is, there's so much business analysis, almost to the point that you can treat it like a private business. Now, they basically break even. Okay. So the thing is, you can kind of treat high-speed rail like a private business, or rather, you can treat it as a private business as long as you have either the state or something that is so institutionalized and so big it might as well be the state. Let's call it JR Central, running and operating it. A private business will not run it. Actually, I had to explain it to some people that, here's an example of something that is profitable and also can only be done with it. Yeah, no, not just England. I would say Britain. England is better at this than Scotland, but the connection between England and Scotland is good geography for rail. Again, the geography of London to Birmingham to Manchester / Liverpool is better, but the geography of going from there north toward Edinburgh and Glasgow is rather good. I would even add that the connections to Wales are okay. You do great. You're probably not going to do high speed. You're going to do medium speed. There's say just keep investing in the Great Western to Cardiff. And then if you want to be really, flashy mega project Britain, then what you do is you build this as high speed rail. Holyhead to Dublin with the very long undersea tunnel. But lol. So it's a kind of thing. This is a profitable investment. I don't mean the undersea tunnel to Ireland. I mean things like Paris to Lyon. So things are on the one hand profitable, and on the other hand are never going to be done at Flixbus scale. It's something that only the state can do. But again, so this actually has a bunch of things. First of all, lots of business analysis, lots of very open discussion because it's a flashy state mega project. So there's, for example, so much more literature out there, mostly from the 2000s. Unfortunately, I haven't seen more recent papers. I've seen some, but not as many as in the 2000s, about things like the costs and the benefits. Because this was such a big issue in the 2000s, the TGV system was very openly successful and growing, and there were questions all over Europe, how much of that should our country imitate, where our country could be anything. And this led to a lot of academic work on this. So because of that, high-speed rail has been studied, I think, at least in, at that level, much more intensively than urban transit. And so, for example, with urban transit, the kind of work done before our database on absolute costs, there's a Fluvbier paper, but it had, I think, 15 items. And just to put this in perspective, our database, I believe, has 900. And but with high-speed rail, this has been studied more thoroughly. I think we do have some contributions because we use PPP terms and therefore could tell you that China is not actually that cheap. But it has been studied pretty extensively. And this also means that there's ridership modeling involved. And again, because the ridership model... I see what you mean. ScotRail has higher subsidies for riders, but ScotRail... Okay, so first of all, I imagine that a lot of that is commuter trains in Glasgow and Edinburgh. Also, I'm imagining that SNP has more willingness to subsidize regional rail than England. SNP just is a normie center to center left Western European party. It's like you mishmash. It's to a large extent kind of a mash of, I don't know, SPD and the Greens here, and this is very much not praise, not pure praise at least, as I understand it. So it's not. So I don't think that Scotland inherently is bad for rail or anything. It's just in Scotland, I'm guessing they're more willing to subsidize things. But anyway, I don't know if FlexLinks are based and they should build more of them. These are even bigger mega projects. Like some of them are actually genuinely huge. The Channel, whatever it's called, the Öresund bridge was a rather large, objectively large undertaking in two countries that at the time had low construction costs and even today have low-ish construction costs. The Fehmarn Belt, this line, from here to here. And of course the Alpine tunnels. So my point is that there's a lot of stuff like open ridership modeling, where people are trying to essentially do in the public sector, in the public. I shouldn't say public sector because academia is, it's public sector technically, but but it's not. It doesn't work for the government that way. Um, in that there's a lot of open modeling of of this kind, the kind that I imagine every airline does privately, for example, hidden behind trade secrets, of course. But I imagine that if you're Ryanair, you have extensive business analysis trying to figure out ridership projections between pairs of cities that you're interested in expanding and offering air service between, or um, China Southern, or wherever, or Thai Airways. So the and so this is essentially the same, except it's much more publicly debated. And so if the models are a little bit drunk, it's easier for people to see that. Quite a lot, I would say, of the argument for privatization, it's a little bit like the argument for authoritarianism, in the sense that things that are in the public sector in democracies are so much more transparent that you see the warts. You see people openly criticizing stuff like inequality. And where do you most see people criticize inequality? In places where it's normal to assume that the rich got their start through privilege, and this is how you're getting things like Sweden, or in general the Nordic countries, which have demonstrably low inequality and high levels of income ability, and people there still focus on the inequality that exists. Nordic Noir constantly talks about this. The public discourse constantly talks about inherited wealth, and then in the United States or the United Kingdom, much higher inequality, especially in the United States, much higher inequality, lower income ability, but for the same ideological reason that leads society to accept that, people also discuss that much less. And of course, in a place like China, everyone knows how corrupt the entire CCP elite is, but you can't talk about this. So if you just look very casually, you will see, oh, people are okay with the government, and the government is very stable. No, they're not. No, it's not. It's just hidden from view. And often privatization has the same kind of aspect to it, where you hide the warts, you hide the parts where the cost estimates aren't as accurate as you would like. So you hide them behind lump sum contracts and design build and $1 billion+ design build contracts. You hide the modeling behind NDAs. A lot of it is just this mentality of you. A lot of this is this mentality that if you don't know that there are social problems, they don't exist. Now, that's obviously bullshit, but some people mind social problems a lot less than they mind open social criticism thereof. Yeah, sure, the S&P is not great on this, but um, I'm assuming especially at least for Scott's Rail, that for I'm assuming that for ScotRail the issue is just it's more public, because you shouldn't be comparing Edinburgh and Glasgow with London, obviously, with commuter trains in London. Charitably Birmingham or Manchester, but Birmingham and Manchester are still bigger. So what are the commuter trains like in Sheffield or Bristol or Newcastle? But anyway, so essentially the whole point of the exercise they were about to do is we're doing business analysis, but it has to be public sector business analysis. Now, I'm not public sector in any way, right? I work for a private university, and our grants aren't even by the government, but it's this kind of open academic discussion that tends to accompany public sector investment, really big public sector investment like high speed rail. West Virginia does not have free uni. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about the modeling, because there's this model that I keep using whenever I crayon here or on blog, Oh God, I'm sorry. I am sorry. And so there's this model that I keep using. I'm going to talk about this model a bit and how it compares. So, not M2, this. So, it's called trip times with trip distances. These are actually exact distances between pairs of cities in Japan. The distance, by the way, is rail distance, not charged distance, and you can see this with Tokyo to Osaka. So, for example, Tokyo to Osaka are said to be 515 kilometers apart. This is the correct distance along the Tokaido Shinkansen, but there's a tendency to charge based on the length of the legacy line, which in this case I think 553. So I'm using the corrected numbers, and I'm not using trip times, which means that the numbers to places that are on mini Shinkansen, by which I mean Akita and Yamagata, are going to be fictional because I'm using correct distances, but the average speed on the Shinkansen is about 220-ish kilometers an hour, and the average speed on the mini Shinkansen, I don't think it's 100. Or maybe it's about 100. So numbers to Akita and Yamagata would be somewhat fictional, but it's fine. These are both peripheral to the system. This is me trying to figure out ridership using the standard model that I use, which is raised to the 0.8th power. So the point of this is that you expect the ridership between two places to be proportional to the product of their populations, because of how probability of travel works. And this part I actually want to talk about. So the model, if you just try to blindly do population times population, you will get wrong numbers. Now, you can always, by the way, if you want, and this is also divided by distance squared, where we have a minimum distance below which we don't count because essentially of the impact of competition with cars at very short distances. And this is a constant. Now I can make the constant whatever the hell I want. But it's trained on Tokyo to a bunch of secondary cities. Like the model, I think that I think I did the model based on how to get Tokyo to Sendai, Tokyo to Hiroshima, and Tokyo to maybe. So I think I'm overestimating Tokyo to Okayama, and then maybe slightly underestimating Tokyo to Hiroshima. And I'm slightly overestimating Tokyo to Nagoya. I think Tokyo to Osaka is about the same. Tokyo to Fukuoka, like this number is fake news. The actual number is I think 1.3 or something, but that's because people mostly fly. And if you take the overall market, it's about 12 million people, I think. And you apply European model splits, this is actually correct. So this is just, it's easier to fly in Japan than in other places. And then the punchline is that if I try to do, if I'm killing this exponent, then I'm making the Tokyo to Osaka problem even worse than it already is. This number is just going to careen upward because this times this, right? I mean, if it's 37 times 19.3, so this is and the constant, and then we can just figure out the constant later. But if I instead do this is a factor of 3.7 more. Now again, let's compare this with the training data, which is Tokyo to Sendai. So remember this is 3.7. How about instead of doing this divided by this, I'm just going to do it. So this is 2.4, and the point is that if I'm not having these constants, then this exponent, then I'm assuming Tokyo to Osaka relative to Tokyo Sendai is about 50% more ridership. And to be very clear, there isn't 50% more ridership. This number, I think the correct number is not 54, it's maybe 50. And this is just about right. I think it's 10.8 maybe. So you have to use the exponent. Now this leads to questions like, Martha. I will say that this has happened to me before when watching people stream StarCraft. So at least this I could tell that it's not because my computer is ancient, because I've seen professional streamers. I've seen this happen to me when watching professional streamers. Like professional streamers with, two screens. I'm assuming good hardware and not vintage trad hardware. Reject modernity, return to tradition. Tradition being a computer from 2016. And but anyway, so I want to explain why you need the 0.8 exponent. The reason is that there are diseconomies of scale. So the theoretical reason for population of metro area A times population of metro area B is that your model should be insensitive to how you divide up the metro area. So for example, when we say Tokyo here, this is for the Shinkansen, do we define Tokyo to be, do we lump the entire Tokyo metro area, the entire fourth prefecture metro area into one place? Or do we do zoning? The professionals would subdivide as much as possible. So let's say we zone it as the city, then the in prefecture suburbs, then Kanagawa, then Saitama, then Chiba. And then for each of them we compute distance. Except we don't actually compute it as distance. We should probably compute this as time. And so, for example, we find that the numbers are for Tokyo, right? So this is station distance from Tokyo to Sendai. That would be here, or to Niigata or wherever. And what do we? So that would be, let's say, for the Tokyo City zone. And then what do we do for? I'm forgetting whether it's correct to call all of this Nishi Tokyo or just least populated parts. I think it's called the Tama area when you include actually populated things like Kokobenji. So we try to figure out the distance from that to Tokyo Station. Let's say the distance on the Chuo line between Tachikawa or Kokobenji and Tokyo. And then we apply some kind of transfer penalty because it does involve walking between platforms, and these are not timed transfers. And then we compute that. The per capita ridership is going to be presumably lower because you need to add up this distance to the final number. And then from Chiba, same thing. We do Chiba to Tokyo on the Sobu line, and then Saitama and Kanagawa. Let's say we do. I guess we assume for Kanagawa it's either Yokohama or Shin Yokohama, whichever is better, and then and essentially we either add a little bit of distance for Yokohama Tokyo or subtract it because people going to Osaka can just start from Shin Yokohama. And of course, Saitama, other way around, right? We I guess assume the center is Omiya, and then we add we either add Omiya Tokyo or subtract Omiya Tokyo. And now the way that this turns out to work is that if the suburbs are all linear along the line, this should increase your ridership, just because because there are more stations. People have a station closer to where they live. So we should kind of encourage a little bit of diseconomy of scale. We should have a function that is concave or convex. I think in American calculus it would be called concave downward, because who the hell can remember whether this shape is concave and this is convex or the other way around. So in American calculus textbooks, and which I mean Stewart, Instead of saying convex and concave, you just say, is the graph concave downward or concave upward? It's much easier. So you want something that is concave downward, like the graph of the square root function, not like the graph of the square function. Square function being this. So the concavity is upward, and then square root. I guess I'm gonna draw it in your direction, not mine. It's gonna look like this. And so if it looks like this, it's concave downward. So we want a concave downward function to kind of encourage, to kind of show that if you break up the metro area to a bunch of things that are on the line, it's easier. Conversely, metro areas are not perfectly linear. And so very large ones will have suburbs that are far away orthogonally to the line. And so, yeah, the fact that in Tokyo you might need to wend an hour on the Chuo line or the Sobu line, not to mention connection to these lines, because people don't generally live in Chiba City or in Kokubunji or Tochikawa. And then that's a lot of extra access time. And so it's harder for the average person in Tokyo to get to Tokyo Station than it is for the average person in Sendai to get to Sendai Station. Sendai, a smaller metro area, yeah, it has a weaker public transport system. But if you're trying to get to Sendai Station, the lines are there. And it's very unlikely you have an hour-long commute. To be very clear, Tokyo has the longest commutes in Japan. I think the longest in the world. I think the average commute in Tokyo is an hour or just less than an hour. Okutama. Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was called the Tama area. So this is the theoretical justification for something that's a little bit less than the power of 1. In practice, so I didn't actually run the numbers separated out on just dividing Tokyo into Tokyo, Okutama, Kanagawa, Chiba, and Saitama. I did run them for New York. And in New York, so when I did my table for American high-speed rail, which I blogged a couple times, U.S. To be very clear, when I say the CSA thing that you briefly saw is combined statistical area. CSA is not Confederate States of America. It's me trying to find racial diversity or compute racial diversity numbers by American CSA. So speaking of CSA, all of these numbers are combined statistical area. For New York, it's about 22 million. The narrower metropolitan statistical area is 19. Just because I'm trying to simplify things in the analysis. But I did at one point try to run some numbers for New York. Instead of doing 22, I did the numbers that are for the metro areas that are on, for the subsidiary metro areas that are on the Northeast Corridor. So the main New York one, the one that's 19 million, is obviously there. And then subsidiary ones like New Haven, like Trenton, yes. But Poughkeepsie is on the train to Albany, but at the time it was just doing Northeast Corridor, and Poughkeepsie is a lot of things, but it's not a Northeast Corridor city. If you try to break things into even smaller pieces in New York, there's something called a metropolitan division in the United States. I only do World War III, not U.S. Civil War II. I mean, I actually think it would be a fascinating old history, which I'm sure other people have written, about what if Andrew Johnson doesn't become president. Either John Wilkes Booth misses, or Lincoln picks a less racist running mate in 1964, and what that leads to Reconstruction. I think it would be a fascinating story, and I'm sure serious people have written this. So this is not me obsessing over polls or over chess or over the kitties. This is me talking about metropolitan division. So New York metropolitan area, and I believe this will have a map of the metropolitan divisions. So all of these, to be very clear, are part of the narrower 19 million MSA, not the larger 22 million CSA, because you see this is where Trenton is. I think the map is a little old because this has been there. This is the Delaware Water Gap area, so also has been included. Poughkeepsie is around here. The Connecticut suburbs, which really need to be part of even the narrower MSA given the commute numbers, are around here is the coast, and then New Haven is around here. But even this 19 million strong region has subdivisions. In census language, it's called metropolitan divisions, where this is the central New York one. Long Island is a separate one. So Long Island, for example, would have longer commutes to Penn Station in order to connect with intercity trains. And if you subdivided the central New York one in further, the upstate, I shouldn't call this upstate, the Hudson Valley or the Westchester or whatever you call them, the suburbs around here would also have a rather long commute, especially long because, of course, from the LIRR, the trains get you to Penn Station. So the LIRR might not be useful for your travel unless it's a rush hour trip to Midtown Manhattan. But the trains go to Penn Station, you can take them and then transfer. So so this contrasts with Metro North, where your trip would take you to Grand Central. And that's an extra trip time with transfers. It must be taken into account in modeling. And this is Newark and its suburbs. So these are places that you would either drive to Newark or drive to an outlying New Jersey Transit station and then take the train to Newark. And usually from around here, you don't even go to downtown Newark because these lines are called the Mars and Essex lines, and they go to a place called Newark Broad Street. So you either have a further transfer to downtown Newark on the Newark Light Rail, or you just take the train or more likely you'll take the train all the way to Penn Station. To New York Penn Station, not Newark Penn Station. And this is a bunch of suburbs that at least do connect to Penn Station, but maybe here it's so far that from here people would drive to Philadelphia. They wouldn't take the train here to take the train to Philadelphia. So the subdivisions, so my point is that you can try to decompose New York into subdivisions, and at least when I tried that, the 0.8 exponent held. So the 0.8 exponent in practice, in very large metropolitan areas, does seem to obey the additive property, with the understanding that the extra stuff you add tends to be far from the train station. New Rochelle, and of course, New Rochelle has the Northeast Corridor station. This is, the more you're doing it, the more granular you do things, the more accurate your results will be. But then you're getting into harder questions like what do we deem to be the population of New Rochelle? It's obviously not just the population of New Rochelle, right? Because it's also the population of suburbs in this along the line, or suburbs that people would drive to a park and ride in New Rochelle from. So the internal divisions, when you go that granular, become harder to judge. And one of the reasons I'm being as ungranular as possible with this is the numbers are sufficiently additive that to first order, or even maybe first and half order, like 1.5th order, this is good enough, and it's less open to debate what the population of Metro New York is. There are CSA numbers. I tried to do an alternate model based on Japanese commute numbers. Japanese commute numbers, by the way, are that you are considered a suburb of a city if 1.5% of the age 15 or higher population commutes to that city for work or school. This is actually something that you can compute rather easily using American commute data. I actually round them, I think, to the township level, or town level, whatever you want to call it, in the New York area, and that reproduces the CSA. Small differences because the CSA is defined by county. I think if you do it by county, you exactly reproduce the New York CSA. Likewise, in Boston, just because of the New England towns, I ran this. I believe you reproduce the exact Boston CSA if you do it at county level and you reproduce something a little bit smaller at the town level. So essentially, at the town level, you're going to, in Boston, miss, I think, the outermost parts of Worcester County. So places that in theory count as Worcester suburbs if your analysis is by county, but shouldn't because it's New England. There are no counties. Like they exist as places on the map, but they are not meaningful places on the map. So at least I have numbers that are comparable to Shinkansen numbers at an area. And so so anyway, this is why I'm using this model. Distance squared actually works okay for putting Sendai and Hiroshima on the same model. Again, Okayama is somewhat it somewhat over predicts Okayama. I think Okayama has a higher air model split than you would expect even for Japan at this scale. The numbers in Fukuoka look actually pretty reasonable. Again, by pretty reasonable, and you want to make it very clear the actual number is around 1/4 of this. It's just that the model split. So this is a 5-hour train trip. In Europe, a 5-hour train trip gives you a model split that might actually be 50-50 between air and rail. It's hard to exactly say because in Europe we have trash cross-border rail. There aren't actually that many domestic trips that are 5 hours by train. We don't actually have US-sized countries or even Japan-sized countries. We have in Euroland one country with about the same population as Japan. I don't have any data there. That country only has 2 big cities, and that country is also rather poor, and that would make a lot of the numbers work differently there. And so essentially this is a lot of extrapolation from just Paris to Nice, which is 5.5 hours. But Paris-Nice has an air rail, has a model split where more people fly than take the train, but not by a very large margin. So if we're trying to benchmark Europe to that in general, probably you can take the air rail model, the air rail market from Tokyo to Fukuoka. It's 13 million people. It should be split with a small majority for air. If you do that, then then you land very close to 4.6. The actual split is about 90% air, 10% rail. Apparently domestic flying in Japan is easier than in Europe or the US, and understanding that domestic airports are set up in a way that maybe they're closer to city centers, much less hassle for security, for standing in line. How does Osaka Fukuoka look? I think over-predicted, but not by much. And even there, people to some extent fly. There's an inter-island penalty. Now, I will say that the numbers are kind of funny when you stop looking at Tokyo to something. So I blogged a while back that all the numbers to Nagoya are fictional, except Nagoya to Tokyo. So Nagoya to Tokyo is over-predicted, but not by much. This is the blog post. It is from 12 days ago. And so not everything to Nagoya is over-predicted, which you can come up with your own reasons why. For example, Nagoya is internally rather auto-oriented. For example, Nagoya is an industrial city that does not have tourist attractions in proportion to its population. Tokyo is the capital and is full of tourist attractions. Osaka has its own historic attractions, and of course so does Kyoto. And because I'm looking at the widest possible definition of a metropolitan area, it is invisible to me whether someone is traveling to Osaka, Kobe, or Kyoto. I'm assuming internally to that region, travel would be disproportionately to Osaka and Kyoto and not to Kobe. But even though I do have travel numbers by prefecture, and they're linked in this post, Um, the I would be skeptical of just straight doing it relative to prefectural population, for example, just because a lot of the business activity is in Osaka and not in, for example, Hyogo. Hyogo being, for people who are not weebs like Borners or to some extent me, Hyogo being the prefecture where Kobe is. So, so all of the numbers to Nagoya are trash, just so that you should know, except the number to Tokyo. I think maybe also the number to Osaka is semi-reasonable, but then all of the numbers through Tokyo are trash. So when I say through Tokyo, I mean things like Nagoya to Sendai, or Osaka to Sendai. I actually wrote them down. Here are the actual numbers. This is Osaka to Sendai, 200,000. This is, and if you're wondering, yeah, airplanes add a little bit, but not enough. So maybe they make Osaka Sendai kind of work, but Nagoya Sendai, even with air trips, the actual is 450,000. Model says 2 million. And this is important because it means that this is something that we should sanity check to. And now, so FYI, things that are through Tokyo are trash, at any rate. So why is that? Well, first of all, it's just harder to get through Tokyo. But second, there might be a cultural effect where if you are in Sendai, why the fuck would you be going to Nagoya? If you want to go to a big city, Tokyo's closer. And that even affects Osaka. So that might be important. Now, I did try to do a second model, and this is what I want to talk about, which is it's called M2 for Model 2. And first of all, you might notice the numbers here look less irrational. This is because there's no reason to a power. The model here is city A times city B divided by sum of city A and city B. This is supposed to reflect, again, a little bit of diseconomies of scale, but also the fact that the problem with a pure multiplicative model is that it assumes that if the ridership, if the population of two cities doubles, then if it's just city A times city B, then the product of their populations will not double, it will quadruple. And this means that per capita ridership will double. This might be true at a very narrow scale. Let's say if this also means that these cities are bigger, so they become denser and more transit oriented. But even that's not going to double your ridership. And at the end of or maybe if it's two cities that are part of a much larger region where people can choose, am I spending my scarce 2 weeks of vacation flying to Hawaii or taking the train to Tokyo and staying in Tokyo? Except in Tokyo would probably just go for a weekend. And in that case, there might be some kind of increase in per capita ridership with population, just because there's more stuff to go to. But it would certainly not be 2x. And even that is kind of sus. So you want something that at large scale is proportional to the country's population. This is why I have a bunch of spreadsheets here, one of which is Taiwan. I actually ran the to the power of 0.8 model on Taiwanese cities. Now, Taiwan has a very good geography for high-speed trains because the population density in Taiwan is linear. It's also a high-density country, which essentially means that there's a bunch of cities that are close to each other. Now, all of these cities, you might be able to tell from Google, from the satellite, they're all here. Very few people live here. So all of the important cities, so there's Taipei, suburbs of Taipei, more suburbs of Taipei, Taichung, Tainan, Kaohsiung. And the upshot is that you should expect one line to cover the entire country, which it does. They built this one line I don't think there are plans to build more lines. Maybe there are some plans to extend. I don't know what this. I think these plans are just vaporware at this point. But there are some plans to extend past Taipei to Keelung, and to extend from Zuoying to the center of Kaohsiung. The Kaohsiung station is not in city center. It's in Zuoying, but for the most part, it's a complete system, and the ridership is very high. Now you can look at my model, and here it works for Taiwan. That I'm doing a little bit of division, and what I say by a little bit of division, Taiwan doesn't define metropolitan areas. Instead, all of its cities are vast. The cities are unitary, which means that there's government at the city level, and at the national level, and nothing intermediate. And for the bigger cities, so again, Kaohsiung, Tainan, and Taichung being the largest non-capital cities of Taiwan. And yes, I'm aware that Taoyuan exists. I'm going to get to it in one moment. Now, Taoyuan is essentially suburbs of Taipei. Taipei is a city of 2-point-something million, surrounded by the former Taipei County, which is called in English New Taipei at this point. It's just one city, which is negative space around Taipei. Has 4 million people. It functions as one economic unit. The innermost parts of New Taipei, aka Xinbei, don't look materially different from Taipei itself. And I say this as a seasoned traveler, and by seasoned traveler I mean I spent 1 week in Taipei, and I think I spent a couple hours, and I'm forgetting which adjacent part of Xinbei. I'm guessing here, because I was taking the MRT. Could have been here, I don't remember. And and the night markets look the same. The architecture looked the same. The density looked the same. I imagine as you go farther out, it's different. But essentially, the only reason they don't merge them is that they don't want one municipality to be a quarter of the country. It's just an administrative thing. The division into Taipei and Xinbei, and so these should really be planned as a single thing. You can even see how Xinbei doesn't really have a city center. It's just around Taipei. Maybe it's more around Taipei west and south, just because the municipal boundaries of Taipei include a lot more mountains north and east, but still. So these are lumped, but Taoyuan is different, is kept separate. You can see that Taoyuan is not as contiguous. It's developing its own centers. So it's separated it out, which should increase ridership. The sum of the ridership, this is 52. I can't actually tell if you can see this, whether my head should not be covering the sum. It's 52. Everything is double counted, so this should be 26 million people a year. And to be very clear, the constants here are the same as the Shinkansen. This is important. If you're wondering what the actual ridership, the answer is 66. So I have here a beautiful model for Shinkansen ridership, which actually gets Tokyo to the secondary cities correct. Is not too terrible for Osaka to secondary cities. Overpredicts Nagoya, but that can be excused. Actually underpredicts some secondary city to secondary city if they're collinear. Things like Sendai to Aomori, or Sendai to Hachinohe or something like that. These are actually underpredicted. So it's kind of weird how if you try to sum the ridership that my model says for the Shinkansen, this one, I'm underpredicting Shinkansen ridership and massively overpredicting passenger kilometers. Just because I'm underpredicting short scale things, and I'm ignoring commuter travel, and I'm overpredicting inter-island things where people instead fly, and I'm over-predicting through Tokyo things, like, again, Nagoya to northern Japan, or Osaka to northern Japan. And so the point is, Taiwan high-speed rail should not be too vulnerable to that, because the main cities, look, it's Taipei to Taichung, so 160. Tainan 308, Kaohsiung 339, and these are all things where they're, especially Tainan and Kaohsiung, these are things where the data is literally trained on the Shinkansen SETI pairs at this scale. Like this is literally the same as Tokyo to Niigata and Tokyo to Sendai. And again, this is closer, but it's not. But the reason I'm saying 26 and it's actually 6 is not because Taichung has way more ridership. I believe the ridership, and I can't find it right now, but I did at one point see ridership, not by city pair in Taiwan, but by city, and of course the dominant station is Taipei Station. I don't think Taichung is too different from Kaohsiung. Like it's not, like maybe a little bit higher, but nothing that just tells me that it's all about very short trips. It's just this is 26 million, it should be 66, and I'm suspecting that it's about the power of 0.8. And the reason is 0.8 plus 0.8 is 1.6. 1.6 minus 1 is 0.6. This means that on average, the model claims that keeping geographic size constant, ridership is proportional to population to the power of 0.6. Now, Japan is a country of what, 125 million people, and Borner's it's not about normalization for per capita regional GDP, because as Borner's reminds us, Nagoya actually beats Osaka on GDP per capita. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I believe Taiwan at this point beats Japan on GDP per capita, but it's very close. Korea, by the way, Korea used to be much poorer than Japan, and I think at this point they're basically the same. And because there isn't any adorable teddy bear with policies such as putting Uyghurs in concentration camps, who objects to the existence of South Korea only to that of Taiwan. South Korea is way better represented in international statistics, which means I can literally look this up for you right now and not have to remember what's the one place that agrees that Taiwan is a country and therefore will tell me its GDP per capita. So yeah, at this point, I guess I think Korea just overtook Japan. This is a Corona effect, but even before Corona. Now, bear in mind, Koreans still work longer hours than Japanese, so maybe Koreans would travel a bit less because they have less leisure time. On the other hand, I will also tell that my model, at least as far as I can tell, my Shinkansen trained model mostly gets Korea right, but slightly, I think, underpredicts. And again, in Japan, in Taiwan, it's like the numbers are almost 3 times what I'm saying they are. Now, Taiwan is a country of 26 million people, 4.8, raised to this power and stupid name, and this is actually very close. Like literally, I'm saying 26 million, and you're multiplied by this kind of over prediction factor, and I'm getting, I believe, the exact number, to the point that it's more about uncertainty in population, because I don't remember Japan's population. Is it 125? Yep, 126. And Taiwan, oh, it's not 26, it's 23 and a half. Okay, so let's do this again. 125 point, we said 7, and then 23.57, and 2.73, 71. Again, the actual is, I think, 66. So basically, that is the overprediction factor, or in this case, the underprediction factor. Now, something like sum and then product divided by sum, that's model 2. Again, product, no powers divided by sum. That does give you the correct power. If all cities double in population, ridership doubles, per capita ridership stays the same. The constant here is chosen to again make Tokyo Sendai. Essentially everything is scaled to Tokyo Sendai. That's kind of patient 0, and then you check things like Tokyo to Osaka gets a little higher and Tokyo Nagoya gets a little bit higher, and again the Model 1 slightly overpredicts them, but you can maybe resolve that with Nagoya always being overpredicted and Tokyo Osaka having some flights, and then to Hiroshima it's not too different, Okayama, Fukuoka, this is also something that's defensible if you apply model splits, and then you look at all of the small cities and these numbers are just hilarious. Like Model 1 tells you that, let's say, Aomori and Hachinohe and Sendai is 222 each. So together it would be about 450,000 people a year. And I believe the actual is 1 million or something. So yeah, Miyagi to Aomori is 1.1 million. Miyagi is Sendai, Aomori is this prefecture, and Hachinohe is also there. So this is not Shinkansen, this is all trips by JR Rail, which are, I believe, the only rail trips that are available. I don't think there are private railway options between Aomori and Sendai. And this is a factor of 2 under prediction. Now, if I do the other model, instead I'm flipping to a factor of more than 2 over prediction. You can always get cute and try to do geometric average of these 2 models or something, but that is not very enlightening, to be honest. And if you try to do this in Taiwan, which again is supposed to control for something, the actual numbers that you're getting out of this again, you divide this by 2, so instead of 237, you should be thinking of this as 118 point something. And again, the actual is, I think, 66 or 67. So this is a massive overprediction. Now, if I'm trying to lump Taoyuan with Taipei, yeah, that makes the numbers lower, but not by enough. Like if I'm gonna do this, the numbers start looking okay, but remember that people do live in Taoyuan, so I need to do this, and the numbers are 174, so it should be 87. So again, closer, but nothing that. And note, by the way, that there's a very small increase, right? I mean, this if I'm pretending that everyone in Taoyuan has been, I don't know, killed in a Chinese invasion, it's 85 million, and if I'm saying that they are all now proper residents of Taipei, then the numbers go up to 87. From 85 to 87, which maybe, but it does feel a little sus to me. And again, the actual is 67-ish. So it's not. So I don't think this quite works out. So this is a model that will just be complete trash if you break out your metro area into little pieces. And this is an undesirable property of the model, because the model should take linearity into account, and if you do this way, you cannot do so. The only way you can make the model not be complete fake news is by, for example, lumping Taoyuan with Taipei. Essentially, the issue is that if you break a metro area into pieces, then a model which is product divided by sum behaves like essentially the ridership will be proportional to the number of equal pieces. Now, in a way, you can defend that to some extent, in the sense that if a country has more cities, there's more intercity travel. A country with one city, let's call it like in Singapore, there's no intercity travel, right? I mean, there's no intercity travel domestic to Singapore, right? Because Singapore is one city, so if you're traveling domestically in Singapore, it's not intercity by definition. And if you're saying, well, if you're dividing the country into 2 cities versus 4 cities, in the 4-city version, there will be twice as much travel as in the 2-city version. And you can defend that by saying, well, in the 4-city version, there are more lines, there's more, so it's more direct. But again, even that is something that should be very degressive, and in this model, it is not. And the second thing is that it makes it impossible to divide a metro area into pieces. So whereas the raising to a power gravity model gives you correct number if you subdivide, product divided by sum does not let you subdivide. And this is a big drawback of the model. And so what else can we do? We can try to get the gravity model, but make the exponent different. But remember that if we make the exponent too much lower, ideally we would like the exponent to be 0.5. But that leads into the problem that this would start over-predicting trips to Osaka. And as always, there's the Nagoya problem of over-prediction. Does ticket price matter? It should matter. But my understanding is that the average fare revenue in Taiwan is the same as in Tokyo. Not in Tokyo, as in... Let me remind myself, there's more to Japan than Tokyo. Let's rephrase that. The fares in Taiwan, as I understand it, are the same as in Japan in PPP terms. So yeah, the fares that you're looking at are as high in Tokyo as not in Tokyo. They're half as high in Taiwan as in Japan, but the Taiwanese dollar is trash. The Taiwanese dollar trades at 30 or 32 to the US dollar. The PPP rate is, I think, 16 to 1. So the Taiwanese dollar is a trash currency, which a bunch of Americans are blaming on Taiwanese currency manipulation to boost the exporters. You can call it that way. You can also maybe point out that because Taiwan is under threat of invasion by a hostile power, that discourages investing in the country, and so just because of accounting equations, if your country is an unattractive place to invest in, you need to export more. Conversely, if your country, essentially the places that can import very freely are places that have either get foreign currency and things that are not counted as export, like tourism. Basically, the countries in the world, you can look at things like list of countries by current account balance, countries by current account balance. The biggest importers are all tourism spots, and this is essentially just because okay, so let's look. Current account balance. Okay, Mozambique, I don't know what's going on there, but Palau, Maldives, I don't actually know which of the Caribbean islands have the most tourism, so I do not know if Dominica is an exception or literally the world. The Bahamas, very famous for tourism. And again, I'm assuming it's the same for Grenada, Dominica, and Antigua. Oman, I don't know what's going on with them. I'm assuming that it's a one-time oil shock, and they're expected to go back to exporting. The oil exporters tend to have the oil exporters. For example, Libya. Libya, the reason it's like this is that Libya has a lot of oil. Generally, the oil exporters have strongly positive balance. So Singapore is not an oil exporter, of course, but it's but Saudi Arabia. It used to be the biggest positive numbers would be places like Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. And so if there's a one-time oil shock, then these countries which accumulated a lot of capital from exporting during high oil price years are essentially drawing down their surplus and smoothing consumption in low oil price years, or in the case of Libya, when oil production has been disrupted. So if your country has high population growth, it can afford to import more because people expect it to be a better place to invest in because more people, so the higher natural rate of interest. So this is how the Anglosphere tends to have current account deficits, just because immigration and relatively balanced birth rates compare with Japan, for example, or until very recently Germany. And so Taiwan, so anyway, because Taiwan has that, is there going to be a 1,000,000-man swim, and is the 1,000,000-man swim actually going to reach the shores? Question. I think that's why the currency there is kind of trash. But no, we do not check emails on stream. No. Okay. No visible email on stream. Good. Sorry. So yeah, ticket price clearly matters, but my understanding is that this is Asia versus Europe. Ticket prices in Asia being generally Eurostar level, almost. Like Eurostar is about 20 euro cents or 21 euro cents per kilometer, and Shinkansen being a little bit more than that in dollar cents. And I think in PPP terms, this is also the same in South Korea and Taiwan. I think Chinese fares are the other way around. They're a little bit lower than European fares. Like domestic European fares, not Eurostar fares. So yes, it matters, but it's not going to matter for Japan versus Taiwan. So anyway, the reason I'm kind of sticking to the reason I'm kind of sticking with 0.8 and not 0.5 is that I'm worried that 0.5 will start displaying the same shit that product over sum displays, where the numbers are just completely fictional. And actually, we can try to do this right here. I mean, so what we need to do is copy sheet, move to end position. We're gonna, what the hell did I just do? Okay, whatever. Right, because I said copy, not copy, move to end position. This is going to be called Ridership M3. We need to, you see that this, there's this weird thing where, so with Excel or Calc, which is just Excel but open source. So you know that if you anchor something and you don't put a $sign, then it'll move you with it. So like, for example, when I make this formula in Ridership, I'm saying, okay, check this cell, let's say this cell and this cell for a ridership, and multiply and then raise to a power. So you need the $sign. So I need, let's say, the $sign $G2, so that it stays 2 no matter what. But if I move it like this, it moves from, you see that it moves from G2 to H2. And for some reason, it also does that when I copy a sheet. So I need to make sure that it's not going to be ridership M2, but trip times is, okay, so we do this, and of course we also need trip times here. And now we're going to just do this, and this should give us the exact same, and this is just me literally copying the formula. So let's check cell G5, 0.055. Yeah, this is, these cells, these sheets look identical. Good, okay. And now we're going to change the exponent from point A to 0.5. Now, obviously, all the numbers are going to look a lot lower. But then we can just, we're just going to fidget, except I guess for things that are very small cities. And then we're going to fix the constant. The constant, as always, we train the data on Tokyo Sendai. So this is now 2.77, and this should be again about 10.5. And so what do? So the constant should be, again, if it's 10.5, we should multiply it by about 4. I'm actually going to multiply by a bit less than 4, and this is numerologically. I want these two constants to be the same. So I'm going to slightly underpredict Tokyo Sendai. And be basically okay with this. And see what happens to everything else. And I believe the numbers are just going to be garbage. So, okay, this is some... a little more than 1,000, so divide by 2 because again double count, it's 550. It's not a stupid number. The actual is 430. But let's look at all the rest and let's see how stupid the numbers are. So let's see. Aomori and Hachinohe to Sendai. Actually, these look pretty close, right? Because the ridership number, the first model says that not Morioka Sendai. It's 440,000. Model 2 is 2.7 million, and Model 3 is 1.66 million, and the actual is again about 1.1. So this might actually be the closest that I got on this, which is not the worst thing in the world. Now let's try to look, and now let's try to play with other things. So Tokyo, essentially, because we made Tokyo Sendai roughly the same, it will make Tokyo to all larger cities than Sendai give you lower numbers, and to Tokyo to smaller cities than Sendai give you higher numbers. So let's say Tokyo to Nagoya is now predicted to be, yeah, that's the problem. It's predicted to be 18.6, and the actual is, I think, 28. This is predicting 25, and I believe the actual is 49 or 50. So yeah, that's the problem with doing square root. The square root will just be trash for big cities. Yeah, Tokyo, what's the actual? Wait a minute, did I just not record Tokyo to... Okay, maybe I didn't record Tokyo to Osaka. Okay, and the actual Nagoya Osaka is 13, and Nagoya is so consistently overpredicted that should be accounted for somehow. What is Nagoya Osaka? Nagoya Osaka actually is correct. It's just that Tokyo Osaka is a number that's literally a factor of 2 too low at this point. And I don't want to start doing fudge factors for transit accessibility. And the reason I don't want to do fudge factors for transit accessibility, which would then boost Tokyo to Osaka because both cities have very strong connecting public transport, the reason I don't want to do that is that this would make all of the European numbers garbage because Tokyo and Osaka, because I'm okay doing a malus between two cities that have trash public transport. Let's call this Dallas to Houston. Let's call this Atlanta to Charlotte, things like that. Detroit to Cincinnati. But remember, if we're training the model in Tokyo to Sendai, the model should be broadly correct for something like Paris to Nice. And if we're starting doing bonuses in Tokyo to Osaka, then it means that we should assume that we should essentially discount all the European numbers just because nowhere in Europe do we have the model split of Tokyo. I think the major European transit cities will have a model split that's probably a little bit better than Osaka. Rail trips per capita in Osaka, I believe it's about 250. So about the same as, let's say, Vienna, Berlin, Stockholm, Paris, things like that. But and the model splits probably going to be a little bit better here. On the one hand, we have more off-peak travel, which lowers the model split. On the other hand, Osaka is famous for its Osaka is going to have more double counting for transfers between different private railways, and the subway. So I believe Osaka is probably, I'm guessing the model split in Osaka is going to be on the order of 30%, 30 to 35%. So let's say Berlin, slightly worse than Paris, slightly worse than Stockholm, slightly worse than Vienna. And then again, I mean, the model should be, and then I'm going to start applying the model to Paris to Nice or something, and then the numbers are just going to be completely fictional. And if we're trying to do, by the way, Taiwan high-speed rail ridership, I'm actually kind of curious whether Model 3 does something for me. So let's see what I'm going to do. What's the most clever way to do it? Move copy sheet, copy. This is going to be called M3, and this should work with the same constants as in Japan because the laws of social science don't actually differ between different countries. How much do I need to copy? This is like the line in the Mulan film where Hans asks how many people you need to deliver a message, and the answer is 1. So you need 2 database lines. This actually gets Taiwan correctly for them. I mean, still under. So the annoying things. This is still an underprediction. Small underprediction. And just as a reminder, if you do ridership, the base model, and correct for the population of Japan versus Taiwan, it goes the other way. So that is a little bit of an overprediction, and here it's a little bit of an underprediction. So this is a little bit weird. But this might actually get you something. Especially if we're multiplying by a little bit, because we did underpredict Tokyo to Sendai for a rather silly numerological reason. But remember, here we're over predicting small cities to small cities. Again, it's fine. There is connecting transit. We can absolutely say, oh yeah, most people in northern Honshu own cars. This is not Tokyo. This is not Osaka. It's probably easier to drive into Morioka or Sendai or Aomori than it is to drive to Tokyo. So the model split versus car is going to suffer. And this is not visible in our data because our data is only scheduled transport. I can tell you based on the link here what the data is for people flying, because flying is scheduled transport, but it does not know car travel volumes. And so this is something to be mindful of. Now, the other thing, by the way, is the issue of Madrid to Barcelona. Now, Madrid to Barcelona basically performs exactly on a par with the Japanese model if you do 0.8. So I guess you do. So I never remember the actual, so I just plug in the model, and that reminds me. And then I believe you do this. I think the actual is about 3 or 2.6 or something. And I slightly cheated in a way that leads to overprediction because I essentially corrected for the fact that the Spanish trains have higher average speeds than Japanese ones. If you do distance, it's not multiplied by 0.8 because by 0.8 squared, because that's 2 versus 2.5 hours. But at any rate, so that would roughly be the right number. And if you do this, no, 0.5, and then we don't multiply by anything, we just do distance squared normalized to 500. The distance is what, 608? It's 650, right? I believe it's 600, maybe 680 is Madrid to Barcelona. So not North Corridor, Northeastern. Oh, 620. Okay. So this is 5 divided by 620. Oh, yeah, it is 0.8. So predicts 3.7, and again, the actual is 2.6. And this is with lower average ticket prices. Now, I'm perfectly willing to say that Spain just underperforms the model, especially relative to the fact that AVE fares are, by East Asian standards, not that terrible, just because the Renfe operations are just garbage. They're so garbage that private competition is leading to a boom in ridership. This, to some extent, also happened in Italy. And to be very clear, with a boom in private competition from ridership in Italy, per capita ridership remains well below the levels of France, where there's no private competition, or Germany. And Spain is I think Spain had, on the eve of Corona, only like 20 million high-speed rail riders. It's insanely low. It's like half the population of the country. In France and here, it's about 2x, not half x. Japan is 3.5x. Higher fares, but much better operations, better connectivity. Passenger usage. Passenger usage, yeah. Half the population of Spain every year, and again, though the network is extensive, it lags in ridership behind comparable systems. No shit. In Taiwan, it's almost 3x the population. Korea, it's, I think, 1.5x. Again, Germany and France are about 2x. Japan is 3.5x. China, I think it's 2x, right? They have 1.4 million people, and I think the ridership is 2.6 maybe. It's like 1.4 million people, because it turns out that when the ethnic minority that you're committing genocide against is only about 1% of your national population, it's not really visible at like that scale. 2.3 on the eve of Corona. I don't know. I imagine it would have exceeded pre-Corona levels by 2022. China had less of a Corona. China had very extensive lockdowns in 2020, but only in early 2020, and then they kind of opened. Remember that China had positive economic growth in 2020. I believe the only developed country that achieved that was Taiwan, the country where in 2020 they had, I believe, 7 people die of Corona. So the overall decline would have been smaller, I'm imagining. And here it took until summer 22. So in Germany, it took until not the €9 ticket, but just before the €9 ticket for DB Fernverkehr traffic to go above pre-Corona levels. And now they're, I believe, noticeably above pre-Corona levels, to the point that they're basically buying trains not based on any kind of long-term planning, but based on which trains can be manufactured right now. The ICE3 now being very conservative, rather than waiting a couple years for a Velar Nova. Exactly. The Barcelona-Madrid numbers will be higher. Essentially, the problem with AVE... So I keep talking about how the correct way to run high-speed trains is through government that tries to act like a business. But when I say try to act like a business, I don't mean asshole business analysis. Asshole business analysis is happening in France and making it hard for the network to expand beyond the core markets of Paris or the provinces. In Spain, it just weakened ridership even on the most core of the markets, Madrid to Barcelona. But so asshole business analysis means you try to segment the market into different groups, and you try to extract maximum revenue from each of them through price discrimination, which means offering an inferior product to each. So how do you price discriminate? You can do the silly thing. You can do the sillies. The sillies means in this context that you can sometimes have people, sometimes they will sell you golf balls, not railroad, people will sell golf balls, and they will sell you either a basic ball and a premium ball, and my understanding is that other than the packaging, they're identical. Essentially, it's for the sort of asshole who plays golf and is rich, probably is just going to buy the premium ball without looking too closely. And so often it's like an elaborate system of surveillance, and on the internet, this is familiar to people with ubiquitous internet surveillance, with the cookies, the pixels, the way that sometimes the pricing even looks at what computer you're using and what browser. Apparently, it costs more. Like some online retailers will charge you more if you're using a Mac than if you're using a PC, because apparently max correlate with higher income or something, or higher propensity to spend money, um, which is something that you can kind of do in retail. If you're doing it in travel, so even in retail, it means that you're creating a miserable experience. It's something that, who was it who called? I think it was Cory Doctorow who calls it enshittification, where you're just offering an inferior product because everything is a lot more opaque. And this is especially deleterious for trains. Why? If you are taking a retail item, like a normal retail item, let's call this item bottled water. Now, I don't think there's a difference between between my bottle, which is an Aldi store brand. It cost me 20 cents. So, not counting the plant, the bottle recycling fee, which I'm gonna get returned to me when I recycle the bottles. This cost me 27 cents. Now, I don't think there's any difference between the store brand and something like Volvic or Evian, which here would retail for same bottle, probably about €1.50. Or there are artisanal brands that have bottles that look a little fancier and talk about secret ingredients. It's all just normal bottled water, and then we'll charge you €2-3. It's all the same bullshit, right? But now you do taste the difference. I'm used to so many different brands because of different supermarkets in different countries that I cannot reliably tell everything. But when I have 2 or 3 brands to choose from, I can tell the difference. Like in Israel, I could tell the difference between the 2 main brands, which were Me'eden and Neviot. They weren't I don't think they were price differentiated. Just I liked one more than the other. My parents would tell the story that because they knew I preferred one brand over the other, they secretly, when giving me a bottle of water for school one day, they secretly replaced the water. Like they took the Me'eden bottle and then they spilled the water and then put Neviot water in it instead and gave me that bottle, and I drank it in school and actually noticed there was something weird about the water. But anyway, so this is something where we can price discriminate, because at the end of the day, I go to a supermarket and have a bunch of different brands to choose from, right? How much of it is we won't think which business? Unclear. In the case of SNCF, it's not we won't think it's which business. They did think which business. It's the airline business. And that got adopted with gusto in Spain. And the thing is, if you do it to a train, what can you do? You can do first class and second class. That is the normie way of doing class differentiation on a train. That's fine. The problem is when you have separate vehicles. Now, this is, to be very clear, something that's not a recent invention. I believe that the first trains ever, I think literally the first railroad, the first recognizably modern railroad, so the Liverpool and Manchester, had different trains for the rich and the poor. I believe there were trains that had first and second class, and trains that had second and third class, but and they were separate itineraries, separate frequencies, not like one train with first and second and third. And so the thing is, in the 1830s, nobody knew the fuck what frequency meant. I mean, they knew the word, but they didn't know it was important. Literally, the understanding of frequency as something that actually affects ridership, you start seeing it in the literature, I think, in the 1970s and 80s, and I don't actually think American planners got it until Jarrett Walker et al. Told them, which was 2010s. Now, Germans, maybe it's different. They started figuring this out in the 1970s at the planning level, but the world was not created in the 1970s, despite the Linux... Is it the Linux epoch? The one that starts 1970? Some kind of UTC epoch. But anyway, yeah. So the point is that if you're trying to separate the train into trains for the rich and trains for the poor, it's going to be separate frequencies, and so each market will have lower frequency. France is doing it with 2 brands. One is called Ennui for the rich. One's called Ouigo for the less rich. I shouldn't say poor because poor people don't usually ride intercities. Um, and in order to keep them separate, so first of all, in order to keep things separate, often you make service worse for everyone. So in this case, it's less frequency. Now, maybe on the core market, like Paris to Marseille, Paris to Lyon, the frequency, there's so much ridership that the frequency is already good enough. So even if you cut it in half, it's annoying but not that terrible. But you do other things. This is, by the way, why SNCF loses money. The enshittification they did with the service to make people take WeGo without destroying the NWE market was that they make the WeGo trains not necessarily serve the yes yeah, in Amtrak it's called the Seller Regional, just that remember that the regional on Amtrak, the fares on the regional are higher per kilometer than on the Shinkansen or on Eurostar, and then the SL fares are even higher. So Amtrak, so Ennui versus WeGo is did you vote for Mélenchon or did you vote for Macron first round? People vote Le Pen first round, don't ride trains. And then for Amtrak, regional versus Acela is essentially slightly less rich and slightly richer. People who were there in France would be the last people who still like Macron. And so in so first of, so yeah, there's a frequency. There's the part where we go on the LGV Sud-Est does not go to Gare de Lyon. It goes to Marne-la-Vallée. So instead of taking a train to near the center of Paris, you take a train to Euro Disney, and then a train with about 1,000 people on it, none of whom, actually not none of them, in equilibrium, half of them, in practice, fewer than half, will be Parisians, and even the ones who are Parisians often don't have it because you shouldn't have a monthly pass if you only travel within the city in Paris. The way that the zonal system works on the RER is that if you live in Paris, the monthly multiplier, so the price of a monthly pass divided by the most discounted, by the most bulk discounted single fare, where you buy 10 tickets at a time, I think that's 54. And to put things in perspective, in New York it's 46, and it keeps slagging on them that it should be lower. In Berlin, it was until the €9 ticket 36. And then I think in Switzerland it's like 20. So the point is that if you live in Paris, you don't usually go into the suburbs. You don't have a monthly. You just have a little ticket for travel within Paris. If you don't live in the region, why would you have a monthly for Paris? So the point is that the majority of people on the train getting off at Marne-la-Vallée don't have the tap card for the RER. So this means that out of 1,000 people, and these are pretty full trains, let's say the average 700 something people, let's say 600 of them don't, 500 or 600 of them don't have the monthly. Yeah, you're dumping in a couple of minutes 500 people or 600 people. All of them are going to clog all the ticketing machines. So there's that waiting. I heard 20 minutes from people who did this a couple years ago. Then it's another 20 minutes or 25 minutes on the just to get to your destination in Paris. Yeah, this is the enshittification. And to be very clear, there's no actual capacity limit at Gare de Lyon. It's just enshittification. Yes, they could. They could have all of this. The problem is, remember that Amtrak can't procure new trains because America can't build. America can also not buy trains because their RFPs for trains in America are terrible, and there's a lot of political micromanagement, e.g. Chuck Schumer literally sabotaging the bid so that he would be able to do a photo op with some hard hats in upstate New York. We're talking about a guy who is under no political threat, certainly within the state. Maybe as a Senate leader, he's under threat if the party loses the election, but he doesn't have to worry. And for national party reasons, he needs to be seen as someone who doesn't do pork barrel politics for a state. Because, I mean, yeah, maybe within New York State, people perceive upstate New York as the more moral, more populous region than the city, but in actual swing states, people don't perceive it that way. In actual swing states, people see money being yeeted to New York that could have gone to tax cuts for moral top 5%ers in Nebraska. So yeah, in theory, Amtrak could do it. Yeah, yeah. No, the then so yeah, so the TGV. So the point is that the WeGo has this gentrification to the point that I believe the nominal fares on the TGV did not increase in about 10 years on average, um, in imitation of low cost airlines. And somehow they could not make ridership grow. There was a little bit of ridership growth between eve of financial crisis and eve of Corona. It was by a couple of percent, and it was mostly just because they built new lines to they completed the LGVS to Strasbourg, and they built the LGV Sud d'Europe Atlantique to Bordeaux, and the Bretagne to, I think, Rennes. Does anybody in the French discourse make my point? Not that I'm aware. I believe the French discourse is between keep SNCF as is and privatize SNCF, or the cheminot, which is keep SNCF as is and raise the cheminot wages even more because something neoliberalism. For a country that's supposed to be governed by technocrats, the extent of actual technocracy in French discourse is laughably lacking, even by American or British standards, let alone German ones. And so anyway, Spain doesn't have two brands, WeGo and Ennui. Spain, I believe, has 7 different classes, like 7 different train types, like Alvia, Avant, things like that, like a bunch of medium speed things that make more stops and are cheaper. And I think they also still keep the low speed classical service at much lower price point. If instead of traveling between Madrid and Barcelona for 2.5 hours, you have like 7 or 8 hours to burn, because of course in Spain, because they built high speed trains, they don't really need to invest in the classical lines, especially because Spanish population density is so low that it's not like there's a bunch of intermediate cities that are being bypassed the way they would in Germany. Like in Germany, so in Germany they did invest in the classical system, and then they didn't build high-speed rail, or didn't build enough high-speed rail. But again, let's say in Germany, the population density is such that on most city pairs, not all but most, let's say Berlin to München, and this is in the east, and population density here is higher in the west than in the east. Not just former East Germany, Bavaria has low population density. So even Berlin to München, there's so much stuff in the middle. Let's say Ingolstadt. The fastest trains don't stop at Ingolstadt. I don't even think if the ETS that go to Berlin even at all stop at Ingolstadt. The fastest ones don't. I think the fastest ones go München, Nürnberg. They don't go through Leipzig. They go to Halle. Maybe Erfurt, Halle, Berlin. And so, but it's still useful to invest in the classical lines for a lot of intermediate shit. Again, for things like for things in Thuringia, I don't know, Bamberg, things like that. Again, Ingolstadt, München to Ingolstadt is the classical line. And so even if you're building a high speed line, it's not instead of the low speed lines, especially if you're not building. If you're building all the main lines to be high speed, then maybe you can get away with that to some extent. But even then, I mean, there's stuff like Regensburg. There's all the stuff in the middle. That's again the Ingolstadt, the Magdeburgs, the Berlin. So the Berlin to Hanover medium high-ish speed line goes like this via Wolfsburg and strategically bypasses Brandenburg and Magdeburg, because it was planned during the late part of the Cold War as the West Berlin to West Germany proper line, so people didn't intend for it to stop anywhere in East Germany. And then when the wall fell, they actually were thinking of modifying the route to actually go via Brandenburg, Magdeburg, and Braunschweig, but instead they kept the more direct, more northerly route. So obviously for such a thing, you would still need to invest in good trains to Brandenburg and the Havel, Magdeburg, and so on. Spain's not like that. Spain is low density. Spain, like the stuff between Madrid and Barcelona, It's what? It's Zaragoza. It's like it's Zaragoza and then nothing like Tarragona, whatever. So they don't need to invest in the classical lines, but they still run cheaper trains on them, or rather lower fare trains on them. But I'm certain are not making any money. Yeah, exactly. And instead of doing that, they are doing trains that only have two classes on board is the norm here. First and second, usually with the Western car in between them. And I'm gonna step off for one moment because it is getting dark. Hi, I'm back. And the and so in Spain, yeah, I can see Spain somewhat underperform Shinkansen model, but the more you underperform, the more I'm questioning things about how much the fares and the poor frequency countermand. And again, France should not be underperforming at all. Germany should not be underperforming. Again, my recollection is that as far as they could tell, if you do the 0.8, the 0.8 exponent, Berlin to Hamburg and Berlin to München, both perform based on what you would expect from the Shinkansen model. So 0.5 exponent would obviously make them it would make them, I guess, underperform because it would have higher predictions. I guess maybe it's not that big of a difference, right? Because again, everything is normed to this, and then Berlin. I think when I computed it, I said Berlin 5, and Berlin should be 6, so it should be this. So the difference between no, that's a big difference. Does Japan have anything to learn from European high-speed rail other than stop building viaducts? Charge fares that people who are not like well-resourced salarymen can afford. Like the Japanese rail fares are too high. What else? Dueless access control, if you can. Time the transfers if you can. Time the outline transfers, if it's at all possible. I mean, obviously you're not going to time transfers at Tokyo, Aki, because everything there is very frequent. But if you can do a thing where a bunch of shit converges on, I don't know, Sendai, or even Nagoya, and you can time it, because already the Nozomi, right? So the Nozomi runs 4 trains an hour off peak, and it's not a 15-minute takt because it does need to overtake slower trains, but it's 2 half-hour takts. I think they're 9 minutes apart. So yeah, you can have one of them also connect with connecting shit in the middle. Actually, maybe you would want the Kodama and Hikari to be the ones that do the time connections. I'm assuming the time connections. Actually, maybe not. I mean, the time connections from like random railway excerpt of Nagoya. I mean, people are probably going to take the train to Tokyo and not to Shizuoka, because presumably if you're going from some random excerpt of Nagoya to Shizuoka, you're driving. Yeah, okay, so you're connecting things to the Nozomi. You can do time anyway, so the time connections I think would be good. But yeah, no, overall Japanese operations are just better than here. It's just it's just the construction costs in Asia are higher than here as well. And so anyway, so the model again, I'm skeptical of I'm still skeptical of a square root model, but and especially I'm skeptical because because I suspect it's going to interact poorly with combining cities versus splitting them. In a place like New York, especially, where it's a big city and then small satellite regions, like the 6.6 and 2.2 are at least okay. And just as a reminder, this is an underprediction. So I don't know, 6.6 and 2.2. Versus 8.8. Yeah, it's a factor of 1.37. And then if you're doing New York, and if we're doing New York, then I'm going to do the following test cases. I'm not going to call it 23.7. I'm just going to call it 22, if people don't mind. And I'm going to do, I guess I could do 23 point. I mean, like if it's 22, then, and again, it should be roughly additive. So if it's the 0.8th power, it's 22. And now I'm going to break things out in the following way. I do 18, I think, is you can do the core, and then Fairfield County is not in the core, and then New Haven is also not in the core, and then Princeton, and then Trenton is not in the core, and I'm going to not count any of the things that don't have a northeast corridor train station. So this is 12.4, and this is a 5% difference. Now, what did we say we were doing? 22. Okay, and now, if instead of that we do 18, no, not 22. If we do square root, again, the absolute numbers don't matter because they're all going to be scaled away. And now compare this with 18, which is almost the same already, plus Bridgeport, plus I shouldn't call it Bridgeport, it's mostly Stanford, plus New Haven, plus Trenton. And again, we're still, and remember, it's 18 plus 0.9 plus 0.9 plus 0.4. So we're actually leaving out a few things. Again, we're leaving out the sort of things that are not on the northeast corridor. And instead of a 5% difference, this is a 40% difference. This is, again, why I'm skeptical of the square root model to some extent. Now we can say, oh, all the subsidiary metro areas are on the line, and that matters, but it doesn't matter. But first of all, it doesn't matter infinitely. Second, these are small regions; they should not be contributing this much. Like the square root model assumes that ridership into, let's say, New Haven, and the ridership of that versus ridership into the core, which would be Manhattan, and not just Manhattan, but also Newark. So if I'm doing 0.8 ridership, it's a factor of about 11, which I can see. If I'm doing square root, it's a factor of 4.5. And I gotta tell you, there is no way in hell ridership into New Haven is only a factor of 4.5 off of the ridership into Manhattan alone, let alone Manhattan plus Newark. I mean, I'm sure the ratio of ridership between the two stations. Actually, I can actually check that. Right. So New York, and bear in mind that the actual numbers will be kind of fake because in New York from New York you can okay, so Penn Station is 10 million people a year. And what is the ridership at New Haven? I want to say it's about 1 million, maybe? No, not even 1 million. So 700,000. So the actual ratio of ridership at New Haven to ridership at Penn Station, it's a factor of about 14 and a half. Now, bear in mind that there's an important difference, which is from New Haven you can get to Penn Station. From New York, Penn Station, you cannot get to Penn Station. Remember, if the only two stations were New York and New Haven, they would by definition have identical ridership. So it's essentially we should subtract New York to New Haven ridership from both. Now we can maybe say that New York to New Haven ridership is not that large because the Amtrak speed is the Amtrak speed benefit over Metro North is very small, and the cost premium is very high. But that's not nothing. People who take Amtrak from New York to New Haven just not a lot. So maybe the ridership ratio is more like 15. No, again, you can say things like, oh, from New Haven, the connections to Philly and DC are not very good, so that's a malus. And we know that ridership Northeast Corridor South is about twice as high as Northeast Corridor North. And all of that is correct, and all of that can justify a factor of about 10 ridership ratio. I don't think it justifies a factor of 4.5 ridership ratio. So this is why I'm skeptical of Model 3, even though you can kind of massage it to make it look like it's working. The other thing is, so like in theory, the correct model should be no exponent, but instead of dividing by just sum, you're dividing by the sum of maybe everything within a radius. And then the question is how to weight things, and essentially but it boils down very quickly to just scale by the population of the country. And of course, again, in Japan, we cannot drop the exponent. Remember, if we're making the 0.8 exponent 0.5 things might go a little crazy. Maybe we should go to a 0.6, 0.7 exponent. And then maybe that's best. And without the exponent, the numbers are just going to be trash. Like, you're going to severely overpredict Tokyo to Osaka. You're going to severely underpredict small city to small city. And again, you should probably expect a model train on Tokyo to somewhat overpredict things like Aomori to Morioka, or Morioka to Sendai, or Aomori to Sendai, because probably suburb of Aomori to Sendai, people will just be driving. Maybe city center to city center, you can take the Shinkansen, but it's very different from how probably even suburb of Tokyo to a place like Aomori, or suburb of Aomori to Tokyo. Why the fuck would you be driving? So anyway, so again, M2 looks like completely fictional. It's product over sum. M3 is not as fictional, but raises questions. M1, which is not called M1 because it's my base model, is the one that still looks like it kind of works. If you know to divide by, again, country population divided by a factor of by a power of 0.6. And yeah, so this is probably the right model, I think, for future predictions. By the way, dividing by country population to a power sounds weird because it essentially implies that if the system gets bigger, then you reduce the ridership on existing sections. Like, essentially what this says is that if Japan is defined as just the Tokaido Shinkansen, then the model, if you get into this kind of division by something bigger, presumes that the ridership should decrease as you build extensions and you increase the size of what's called Japan. Except we're not talking at all about connecting trains. We're not saying how many people ride this segment, right? We're talking O&D Tokyo to Osaka. The effect of adding more cities to making Tokyo to Osaka stronger is that maybe these places get more centered around the train station, but certainly it's not going to happen to Tokyo to Osaka just because their populations overwhelm everything else. Maybe it happens to things that are of comparable size. But the thing is, certainly if the things are of comparable size, that's in competition, right? If I live in Tokyo and I have some time to kill and I'm going to take the train, I can go to Kyoto or I can go to Niigata. So the presence of the trains to Niigata is going to reduce my propensity to take trains to Kyoto. And this is, I think, where again, it's something that the product over some model gets theoretically. It's just one of those things that might work in theory, certainly does not work in practice, and even has, in this case, with the split in a metro, some theoretical problems. Anyway, it's been 2 hours of recording, and I'm going to stop here and take questions if people have any. By the way, I will say that because so the population density of Japan is high. It's like 300 something per square kilometer. So let's say higher than the Germany plus France zone. And it's linear, which should help ridership. It also means things are farther away from each other. I don't think you need to. Like, I mean, if you're doing like a kind of Europabahn kind of modeling, you might be able to get away with the same constant as in Japan. With the model with the 0.8 exponent, which requires it to correct for country population. Just because the extent of in practice, the extent of this is like the population that you can access within, let's say, 1,000 kilometers is going to be pretty similar. It's going to be pretty similar. I mean, it's a bigger region in the sense that trains between Berlin and München compete with flying from Berlin to Italy. But again, at some point, I mean, there's global flying. You can fly from Japan to South Korea, so it's not. So even though, empirically you're dividing by country population to exponent 0.6, it's something that only becomes really intense for something that's kind of isolated like Taiwan, or by the way, California. Essentially, one of the predictions would be that California should overperform this model, like Model 1. Do I think that once the Chiba line is built, they should bully JR Central to having three running at Tokyo Station? I think they should bully them to having three running at Tokyo Station before the Chiba Shinkansen as well. Just run N700s north. It's fine. You're getting a vibe that China might be good training. That's it. I'm skeptical. There's so many things in China that mess you up. First of all, poor country. People sometimes have this idea that China is a peer country to the first world because it's big. It absolutely is not. So we're doing GDP per capita by country, and let's do China, Thailand, Indonesia, Ukraine, Bulgaria, Turkey, South Africa. Maybe also Mexico if you want to check yourself. Either get this URL or just check World Bank GDP per capita PPP. So Turkey is by far the richest of these. Bulgaria, Thailand, China. So know that, for example, Bulgaria, by a pretty big margin, the poorest EU member. It's like Bulgaria, and I think then above it, it's Romania. China's noticeably poor. What else? South Africa is barely poorer than China. Ukraine is poorer than China, but not by much. And this is essentially the fact that Ukraine has not really been able to grow its economy in the last, 9 years due to a certain, I think it's like in his 70s at this point, right? No, it's in the 60s. So thanks to a certain retirement age former KGB officer who has ideas about Ruski Mir, however the fuck they pronounce that. Yeah, exactly. So the GDP per capita, you should remember, the fares are, I want to say constant GDP per capita. They're not, because China's fares are lower than European fares, but not by much. So that matters. Second, China's security theater. And stations in the most lunar locations ever. And by lunar, I mean it's literally on the moon. And that's not, and I don't mean in the sense that in France, yeah, they built Pardieu. This is the distance between Pardieu and the historic core of Montreal. Or here, I guess. There are multiple metro lines around Pardieu because this became the new city center. 2 kilometers. 3 if you want to do it this way. Now, let's compare this with basically anything other than Beijing. Like Beijing South and Beijing West, I think, are at least reasonably urban, and then in Shanghai, and this is going to be a little weird because of the errors that the PRC forces foreign firms to introduce to their mapping because of communist era paranoia about mapping and the idea that if you release public maps, then the enemy will know how to invade the country. Now the enemy, of course, already knows how to invade the country, but the intelligence level, like the average communist apparatchik, can be seen in which direction people fled the Berlin Wall. Okay, so Hongqiao station is here. What's the distance to the center of Shanghai at People's Square? And this is me, and this is satellite view, so let's ignore. And so the distance to this part of town is 15 kilometers. Here, here, here if you want the Bund. If you want the historic Shanghai station, which is just outside city center, it is here. Yeah, that's the difference. And Hongqiao has a metro service. I think it has 1 or 2 lines there. City with that I think the numbers it's lined sequentially, and I think they're at line 17 at this point. So again, because China is doing a lot of terrible things with its system, and is also a poor country, I imagine it should underperform. Now, of course, the lines are also much faster. Like the average speed is like 270, 280, maybe 300 even on some lines, and on Comparanda there would be 220, so that would skew in the other direction to some extent. That can be corrected very easily in the model. Things like China is poor, or China makes it, or I guess China adds it to the door-to-door time that can also, to be some extent, be corrected. Yeah, the coastal cities are significantly richer, but that's not unique to China. Yeah, China is very high inequality, but London is substantially richer than the rest of the UK. Paris is substantially richer than the rest of France. Milan and Rome are both substantially richer than the rest of Italy. Madrid and Barcelona are both substantially richer than the rest of Spain. So it's a sanity check, but it's a sanity check that I wouldn't take to the bank, certainly not within a factor of more than about 2. And we're talking about models where, to some extent, I can get you the right numbers to within 10 or 20%. Like if I'm allowed to have a doo-doo by a factor of 2 in either direction, then the modeling gets substantially simpler. But I'm trying to avoid having a doo-doo by a factor of 2 because I'm trying to not just say, ooh, this is a really strong line you should build. Like, I don't need to tell Americans that the strongest line in America is the Northeast Corridor. They know it. I don't need to tell Europeans that they should speed up the lines through Belgium so that Paris to Amsterdam is viable and also doesn't charge Thales prices. Or that they should be completing the gap between Paris and Frankfurt. Everyone knows this. They just think Europe can't build across borders. Does China have anything to tell us about HSR at continental scale? I'm not sure. I would actually be interested in seeing how Chinese data on high-speed rail varies by ridership, by distance, just to see whether how the square model fits domestic Chinese trips. Because we know that in Japan, it could be made to fit, but it requires making assumptions on the air rail model split that are correct for Europe, and I presume will be correct in the United States. I mean, they're correct with the Northeast Corridor, at least to some extent, and are false in Japan. And even these assumptions, there's a range. So I'm not like I don't think that it's a factor of 2 doo, but it could be a factor of 1.5 error, and I'm trying to avoid that. So yeah, China does have to things to tell us about this, but that's mostly things like looking at the ridership between Beijing and Guangzhou, between Shanghai and Guangzhou, like looking at how the ridership looks like when you have a lot of city pairs that are 5 hours away, because in Europe, essentially it's Paris to Nice. It was Paris to Toulouse before the GV d'Europe Atlantique opened. It was I think maybe some corner cases in Germany, like I think maybe Hamburg. Let me actually check Hamburg to Stuttgart, to Hamburg to München, maybe Berlin to Stuttgart at this point. So in Germany we have corner cases. So again, it's corner cases. And I want to say whether it's more general. And in Japan, the issue is that 5 hours away you're on a different island, and there's the inter-island penalty. So Berlin to Stuttgart Hauptbahnhof. I'm guessing that's gonna be. I am guessing that is gonna be. Oh, it's more than 5 hours. Okay, yeah, it's 5.5 hours on a direct train. Because I guess it's 4 to Frankfurt, and then it's what, 20 minutes Frankfurt to Mannheim or something, or 30. No, it's more than. Wait, what am I talking about? It's more than 20 minutes. It's like Frankfurt to Mannheim is like 40 minutes or something. And then it's another 30 something minutes Mannheim, or like 30 minutes and a bit Mannheim to Stuttgart. To be clear, both Mannheim to Stuttgart today is 30 minutes if you don't have, or less than 30 minutes if you're on the trains faster and don't have so much schedule padding. But again, Germany gonna Germany. So yeah, this is what China has to tell us. It's looking even internally at what happens at like the 4 to 6 hour mark, where at the 4 hour mark we still have good data in Europe and in Japan, but by 5 it is getting thin, and by 6 it gets non-existent. Again, there are 6 hour trips in Germany. There are people who even take them in preference to 4 hour trips between Berlin to Munich. There are the trains from Berlin to Frankfurt sometimes continue on to Munich for the intermediate trips. And some people take them because either they can get cheaper tickets, or because they can work on the train and they don't care, or the trains are or the trains are less crowded or something. Some people have weird moral choice. For the most part, people just take the direct trains. Incidentally, this was the only Berlin to München train available before they opened the new line a couple years ago. But again, it's basically non-existent. And for the most part, we're just talking about international things. And then for international things, the trains in New York are so bad. So yeah, we can talk about Berlin to Amsterdam or something. But lol is the only thing I'm going to say. So this is where where looking at Chinese data would be interesting. But certainly would not benchmark China versus another country. I would do internal benchmarking on China, just because there are so many China-specific variables. Are there other questions, by the way? Just pointing something out. What's the lag? Oh, thanks for the question. Do I have 2 different? Yep, just different countries. This looks pretty laggy. And I'm of course lit differently. Yeah, is this 30 something seconds of lag? It's terrible. It's usually 10 seconds. Okay, so I do need to sit here for like a minute and wait for more people to type in questions if there are any, just because I do not want to strand someone. But afterward, I guess this jumped a little bit, and now it's, oh my god, only 25 seconds of lag. Should maybe play real-time strategy with 25 seconds of lag. That would be fun. Or rather, if I have normal lag in StarCraft, which is probably about, sub 100 millisecond ping, and I'm playing at actual pro who has, multi-second lag, I might even be able to beat the pro. And I don't mean 2-second lag. Cyril with 2-second lag would murder me. I mean, Cyril with 20-second lag, I might be able to beat. I have no idea. I don't actually know much about the reasoning for the Turkish high-speed rail program. This is an Elif question, and we haven't done a deep dive into Turkey. The best I can do is look at this and see what they're doing. So the answer is that I don't actually know. Again, we can look at a map strategically in German. In Betrieb. It's also not very direct. So again, I don't know. Why they did it this way. Yeah, Brightline West has so many special factors. First of all, LA to Vegas is a really weird thing. Vegas very obviously will overperform any ridership model based exclusively on city population. We know this. We know the air traffic numbers into Vegas. I believe Vegas is, I believe American airports by ridership, and I'm combining airports in the same metropolitan area. And I'm also only going to do O&D, because if you include connecting, then I think all of New York combined beats Atlanta, but only narrowly. So I believe only O&D, it would go New York, then LA, then Chicago, DC, San Francisco, maybe New York, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, DC, Boston, and then narrowly behind Boston, Orlando, and Vegas. Maybe Miami also. So Miami kind of has a reason to be that high, but Orlando and Vegas just because stupid amounts of tourism. Now it's also extremely seasonal, and this is actually a big issue with business analyzing LA to Vegas. The ridership is going to be extremely peaky, to levels that do exist in France and Spain, but are kind of high end by the standards of France and Spain, I think. And of course they are building the California terminus, not anywhere actually urban, but in Rancho Cucamonga. The original plan was to go to Victorville, and since Brightline took over, it was called Desert Express. It would be median of the I-15, so slower average speed than usual because of curves from Victorville to Vegas. And I guess since then, I don't actually know if they're going to piggyback on Cajon Pass or build their own pass. If there's any space on Cajon, they should use it because it's a slowdown. But you're avoiding a tunnel in an earthquake-prone area. But anyway, this is the terminus. So technically, in something that's recognizable as the LA region. Technically. So imagine people from here having to get here. So first of all, there are no trains. There might be a commuter line, I'm not sure, but it's LA, so we're talking people driving like this. I think the original idea was to go to Victorville because I-15 was 4 lanes each direction, and past Victorville it's 3 lanes. So it's going to be people parking. It's all going to be at the same time, so there are going to be traffic jams. The parking situation is going to be insane. The walk from the parking spot to the train is going to be a significant addition to your trip time. Driving time is going to be a significant addition to your trip time. They're only going after one market, which is the peakiest of them, which is LA area people going to Vegas. Whereas ideally you want to be symmetric, and while you're doing it, that's the thing about like public railways. You want to avoid asshole business analysis. So yeah, you want to predict where you're going to be able to profitably build, but you don't want to do asshole things like overly segment the market. And one of the implications is that you want the same trains to carry passengers of different travel purposes and different directions. So you want the same trains to be able to carry people from the city going to secondary cities, for example, for tourism, for example, to see family, for example, for business purposes, and people in secondary cities going to the big city for all of these purposes. This is very obvious if there's a clear hierarchy. Let's call this hierarchy New York to New Haven, New York to Scranton, Chicago to literally anything else in the Midwest, Paris to anything else in France, London to anything else in Britain. But this is equal to if there's no clear hierarchy, as there isn't between Tokyo and Osaka, or between Madrid and Barcelona, between London and Paris, between Berlin and München, or Hamburg or Frankfurt, between even New York and DC. New York is much bigger, but DC is not like secondary to New York, or for that matter, LA to Vegas. And LA is much bigger than Vegas, but Vegas has so much tourism. I believe that single airports, and this is based on my memory of airline geek forums from many years ago, and probably even then that I was not current, so caveat emptor. I believe in the US the top airports for O&D travel are LAX followed by Vegas, and it's pretty close. New York, before it's being split 3 ways, much more evenly than the 5 LA area airports. So it's pretty symmetric, but this setup only gets you people who live here and are going to gamble in Vegas, as opposed to people who are, let's say, or maybe going to a convention in Vegas, as opposed to people in Vegas coming to LA. And I think that is a bad decision, especially because Vegas to LA is going to be much more normal ridership, obviously much less than LA to Vegas, because the model assumes symmetry. And if one area has much more tourism than the other, then the symmetry will be violated, and people will go to that region more than to the other. But that's still something, and this is much cheaper ridership to serve than this, because this ridership is not especially peaky. This is something that's been business analyzed to death, because from the point of view of a Nevadan going to California is the big city, or LA or San Francisco is the big city, and where they live is the province. From the perspective of the townies, the hierarchy exists. This is different from, again, Berlin, Frankfurt, or London, Paris, or Tokyo, or even Tokyo, Osaka. But in that, if one area has a lot of tourism, for the tourist from the big city, the hierarchy is violated. But for the townie of the tourism region, the townies don't think of their region as glamorous. The person who works at a casino in Monaco doesn't think of Monaco as glamorous. The person who works at the casino in Monaco, first of all, probably doesn't live in Monaco but lives in Menton. But second, for that person, the Riviera is just where they live and work. It's not glamorous. For tourism, they go elsewhere. Maybe they would want to go to Paris. So in that case, there's more of a hierarchy, and this means that this ridership, as opposed, or let's call it this ridership, as opposed to what they're serving, which is this ridership, if that makes sense. Um, in that case, this ridership works so much like any other normal high-speed line connecting a bigger city with a much smaller one. Let's call it Paris, Lyon, Tokyo to anywhere else in Japan, except maybe Shin Osaka. And with Osaka, we saw that the ridership model holds, basically. London to anything else in Britain, that this, we know the operating cost of this. We know the ridership on this. That's not a matter of speculation. Maybe the part that LA is atypically decentralized leads to some speculation, especially because in LA, it's so uniquely decentralized that even the tourism bits are not in downtown LA, they're off in West LA. But there's the Purple Line. People can take the Purple Line to UCLA, that's fine. So other than the big asterisk about connecting transit, this is actually pretty well understood. The other one is the one where they're being more speculative, which is kind of weird because they'd expect private businesses to be less risky. And yet, and I hope that's answering your question, Sani. In way too many words. Are there more questions, by the way? Oh wow, the lag is shrinking. The lag is... Okay, it's not shrinking anymore. When this finally loads. It was 20 seconds at some point. Anyway, are there more questions? Yeah, we're back to super 30 seconds lag. Used to be, at some point it was 17. Ooh, awesome, thanks. Okay, do people have more questions? And then, if not, it's going to be a 2.5 hour recording, I guess. For something without Korean, that's a lot for me. What was the topic today? Modeling high-speed rail ridership. Model 1 is the traditional one. Raised to the 0.8 power, multiply population, find a constant that scales with Tokyo to some secondary cities and try to see how it works with the rest. Model 2 is population is city A population times city B population divided by the sum, which is which is supposed to behave better with increasing the size of with, let's say, increasing the population of each city by the same factor, but turns out to behave very poorly with anything else. And then model 3 is square root instead of 0.8 power, which that versus 0.8 power, it's debatable, but 0.8 power is probably better. Yeah, I'm probably not gonna do the book reading. Mostly because the thing is, so I also have not read Jack Walker's book, so I'm gonna finish on this now. So I keep recommending these books that I have not read, and probably will not read. And why have I not read them? I've been reading basically everything Jarrett Walker has written since he started blogging. So I can tell you a lot about Jarrett Walker's thought because I've been reading the man's blog for 13 or 14 years. A lot of my views have co-evolved with his to some extent. And the same is true of Christoph Spieler. And the same is true of, let's say, Yona Freemark writes a book. I will probably read I might actually read that book if it's new, because we've been withdrawing from blogging recently, I mean, the last 10 years. But again, if I read these people's papers and I talk to them and read what they say on social media and I read their blogs, the book is just going to be a summary, which is useful as a reference. But if I'm thinking in terms of social, but I don't need to do this because again, I'm just very intensely familiar with what they think. And I think what he thinks is very valuable. I will recommend it, but I already know this. It's like asking me if I would read a certain abstract algebra textbook only if I'm teaching out of it. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for staying with this log for 2.5 hours. It's not crayon. And I will see you again. I don't know if in 4 days or in a week. Topic as usual TBD. But thank you all for watching. Have an amazing either half week or week. And ciao ciao.